At the beginning of 1968, the anti-war movement had grown large enough to attract a candidate for president, Senator Eugene McCarthy of Minnesota.
So we are volunteers for Senator Eugene McCarthy.
McCarthy took on the daunting challenge of opposing President Johnson in the Democratic primaries. At first, McCarthy's campaign was dismissed as a kiddie crusade, but the Tet Offensive changed all that.
To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic, if unsatisfactory, conclusion.
When the opposition switched to CBS, Walter Cronkite, the New York Times, the floor of the Senate, the pulpits of the country, Lyndon Johnson knew that was a dramatic change and a fundamental change in the attitude of the American people.
A change that was reflected in the shocking results of the New Hampshire Democratic primary. McCarthy ran a close second to President Johnson. Opposition to the war and to Johnson continued to mount. And finally, on March 31st, he announced he would not run for a second term in office.
With American sons in the field far away, I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes.
But despite the dramatic changes, the war continued. The April draft of 44,000 was the highest in 12 months. And after 3 years and 25,000 lives, the war was taking a toll that more and more Americans were finding unacceptable.
Vietnam has forced many great sacrifices on communities all across the country, but few towns have given as much as Ontonagon. Ernie Skinner and his high school buddy Billy Lundberg went into the Army together, went to Vietnam together, and last year were killed in action together. 7 young men have been killed in the war. Many of the townspeople of Ontonagon want to stop sending their boys to Vietnam.
Well, all I can say is I'm not as patriotic as I used to be. After losing Billy, I just can't be.
But even as Middle America was reassessing the war, radicals in the anti-war movement were becoming more extreme.
There was this sense that America was being taken over by radicals and hippies and long hairs and left-wingers and Marxists. And God, the war in Vietnam wasn't going very well, and we needed to support our boys. There was this awful sense that the authorities were losing control.
I was in World War II, fella, and I served 3 years. I know what it's about.
The increased militancy caused increased anguish, anger, and backlash. That summer, anti-war protests at the Democratic Convention in Chicago turned into 4 nights of violence. Violence that was brought into America's living rooms on television.
Our belief was that we might very well come out of this dead. It'd just be carried out on stretchers. It was really almost on a war footing.
The violence suggested to many Americans that Vietnam was tearing at the very fabric of the nation. A 1.5 million students demonstrated at colleges across the country. One of those demonstrations would be long remembered, Kent State University in Ohio. It began with a fire on May 2nd.
The fire at the Army ROTC building was spotted minutes after several hundred students rallied on the Commons, chanting anti-war slogans and tossing cherry bombs. Other students poured from the dormitories and began smashing the building with rocks.
In response to the violence, Governor Rhodes called in the National Guard.
After 2 days of rioting over ROTC and Cambodia, the university had banned rallies, and the National Guard stood by to enforce the ban.
Leave this area immediately. Leave this area immediately.
The warning was issued several times, but the students were angry and they stood defiant. Guardsmen were given the order to move out, but first the students were peppered with tear gas fired from rifle-like launchers. In moments, clouds of tear gas covered the center of the campus. The students fell back over a hill, answering the guardsmen with rocks. Suddenly, from over the hill, there was rifle fire. 4 students, 2 of them females, were shot to death. At least another dozen were wounded.
Everybody said they had blanks, but some of them had real bullets. They just looked like they fired up in the air, and I looked around, there's guys laying dead.
My best friend was murdered by the National Guard.
They were not ordered to fire. Each soldier fired when he thought that his life was in danger.
The Nixon administration was quick to come to the defense of the National Guard.
Had the rocks not been thrown, there would have been no chance of the killing.
She felt that war in Cambodia was wrong. Is this dissent a crime? Is this a reason for killing her? Have we come to such a state in this country that a young girl has to be shot because she disagrees deeply with the actions of her government?
The killings at Kent State seemed to mark a climax for the anti-war movement. The war had come home. The government had fired on its own children.